Whispering Pines was a quiet town, too quiet. The houses were old, the streets were empty, and secrets lingered like cobwebs in the attics of the town's history. A place where nothing exciting ever happened. Until now. It started with an old abandoned house at the edge of town. The house stood on a hill, overlooking Whispering Pines with a watchful eye. Locals whispered tales of a family that once lived there, a family that met a tragic end. No one dared to go near the house, especially not at night. The old house was a source of endless fascination and fear for the townsfolk. They whispered about strange noises and flickering lights, but nothing could prepare them for what was to come. A mystery that would send chills down their spines and keep them from sleeping at night. The mystery of the haunted radio. Every night, as the clock struck 2:15 a.m., something strange happened. A chill would run down the spines of anyone awake to feel it. The old radio inside the abandoned house would crackle to life, its sound piercing the silence of the night like a scream. No one knew how the radio worked. It had no power source, no one to turn it on. Yet, every night at the witching hour, the radio would come alive, its speakers emitting a strange symphony of static whispers and what sounded like distant music. Fear gripped the hearts of the bravest souls in Whispering Pines. Even the toughest men wouldn't dare go near the house, not when the radio was playing. The sound seemed to seep into their bones, filling them with a sense of dread they couldn't shake. They talked in hushed tones about the radio, speculating about its origins and the meaning behind its eerie broadcasts. But no one dared to investigate. The fear was too great. And so the radio continued to broadcast its nightly terrors, its secrets safe within the walls of the abandoned house. One day, a stranger arrived in Whispering Pines. His name was David, and he was a writer drawn to the town by its eerie tales and the mystery of the haunted radio. He had heard whispers of the house on the hill, of the radio that played on its own. He knew he had to see it for himself. David wasn't like the other townsfolk. He didn't believe in ghost stories or the supernatural. He was a man of logic and reason, and he was determined to find a rational explanation for the strange happenings in Whispering Pines. Ignoring the warnings and concerned glances of the locals, David decided to spend the night in the abandoned house. He wanted to experience the haunted radio firsthand, to understand what made it tick. He packed his bag with a flashlight, a notebook, and a digital recorder, ready to document whatever he encountered. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over Whispering Pines, David made his way to the abandoned house. With each step, he could feel the weight of the town's fear and superstition bearing down on him. But he refused to be deterred. He was determined to uncover the truth behind the haunted radio. Section 4. Shadows and silence. The old house loomed over David, its windows dark and empty like the eyes of a skull, the paint peeled from its walls like shedding skin, and the front porch creaked ominously under his weight. He pushed open the front door, and a musty smell like the breath of a tomb wafted out to greet him. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like macabre decorations. The air inside was heavy with silence, a silence so profound it felt like a living presence. David took a deep breath and stepped inside, his flashlight cutting a shaky beam through the darkness. He could hear the sound of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. The house felt cold, unwelcoming, as if it resented his presence. He made his way through the house, each room as empty and decaying as the last. He ran his fingers along dusty furniture, imagining the lives that had once filled these spaces. And then he heard it, a faint crackling sound coming from upstairs. Section 5. Face to face with fear. The sound grew louder as David climbed the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. He followed the sound to a small room at the end of the hallway. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty old radio sitting on a table in the corner. It was the only piece of furniture in the room, and it seemed to pulsate with an eerie energy. The crackling sound was coming from its speaker, growing louder with each passing second. David stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on the radio. He had never seen anything like it. It was as if the radio itself was alive, its wooden casing breathing in time with the static emanating from its speaker. He reached out a hand to touch it, but before his fingers could make contact, a voice boomed from the radio, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "David Harper," the voice said, his name echoing through the room, sending chills down his spine. Section 6 trapped. David stumbled back in shock, his heart racing. The radio went silent, the crackling sound abruptly ceasing. He stood there for a moment, frozen in fear, unsure of what he had just experienced. Then, before he could process what was happening, he heard a loud bang behind him. He spun around to find the door to the room had slammed shut. He tried the handle, but it was locked. He was trapped. Panic welled up inside him as he rattled the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped in the room with the haunted radio, and he had a feeling something terrible was about to happen. And then, just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, the radio crackled back to life. This time, it wasn't static or whispers that filled the air. It was the sound of his own breathing, heavy and panicked, as if he were running for his life. But he wasn't running, he was trapped. The sound of his own future terror filled the room, and David knew then that he was in grave danger.